Hello and welcome to another episode of Canadian History X. Today we're in the community of Brooking, and I'm actually standing in an old grain elevator in the community of Brooking. You don't see very many grain elevators these days, and you certainly don't see them in places like a ghost town like Brooking. Now, Brooking was originally named Brookings, and it was named after a community in South Dakota, and for a time it was a thriving location with stores and dozens of residents, a lumber yard, the grain elevator, all of that. But by the 1920s and 1930s, with the creation of Radville just down the road, people began to move down there because that's where the trains began to meet. Over time, Brooking lost its residents and now is just a few buildings in the middle of the prairie in a farmer's field. But it's very cool to check out, so we're going to go and check out all of that this community has to offer. It all started with a dispute over a name. One side wanted to name the small community that sprang up in southern Saskatchewan after the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Stowe. The other side preferred the name to be Brookings, after a town in South Dakota. After some discussion, the Brookings camp won, and over time, the name became Brooking. Before we get to what Brooking became and what it is now, we need to step back and look at how the village came to be. The mounted police were the first Europeans in the area, patrolling through the land in 1900. O.A. Johnson is considered to be the first settler in the Brooking area when he arrived in 1904. 1 year later, more and more settlers began to arrive, and by 1906, every homestead was taken. In order to get to the next nearest town, it was a 55-kilometer trip to Weyburn. For farmers, that was a necessity as it was also where the closest elevator was found. Around this time, to make things easier for farmers, a small cement bridge was built during the winter of 1906 by the provincial government. The goal was to ensure that farmers would cross the creek in order to sell their grain. That small bridge would become an important landmark, although it is long gone today. Also in 1906, the Buffalo Valley School District was formed, and a school was built in 1907, opening in the summer of that year. With more and more settlers in the area, a petition was sent to the Minister of Railways, Telegraphs, and Telephones in 1910, asking that the railways be extended and a town be created along the line. The town did not have a name at the time, so it was called Ceylon. Later in that year, it was suggested that the name would be Buffalo Valley, but that was considered to be too long of a name. The debate over Stowe versus Brooking was then held, and Brooking was chosen. The first store to operate was owned by the Lewerton brothers, which provided everything settlers needed. On March 1, 1910, the first post office would open with one of the brothers serving as the first postmaster. Bob Keyes, a local carpenter, would build many buildings in the town, including this 3-story hotel. The community quickly thrived and had 3 elevators, 2 stores, a hotel, pool hall, school, lumberyard, and much more. All of this happened thanks to the Grand Trunk Pacific branch line coming through, running from Radville to Willowbunch. In 1912, it was decided to create Radville, just down the line from Brooking, and to turn that community into the divisional point for the railway. For those who had worked hard in the community to establish their businesses, this was a crushing blow. While the population of the community continued to grow into the 1920s, reaching 118 people, the trend was already to move businesses to Radville. Several fires, including the hotel fire in 1914, did not help matters. In the 1920s, Brookings hit its high point of 118 people, but things were about to change. By the time the 1930s came along, better roads and the better use of automobiles caused many to move to Radville, which was very close to the east. By 1935, only 5 services were found in the community. Oddly enough, the Brooking Rural Telephone Company would be formed only a few years before the last gasps of the community. The company was created in March of 1958, and the shareholders immediately went about buying the old Keydale rural telephone line. Unfortunately, while the 6 shareholders were tearing down the line, one pole fell and killed Howard Yinkst in December of that year. In 1959, the rural telephone line was connected to Radville. The company would operate for the next 19 years. The post office would officially close in 1961, with Royden Wallen being the last postmaster. That same year, the Brooking Co-op Association would shut down as well. In 1968, the elevator closed. 3 years after that, the train station closed its doors. Today, nothing remains of Brooking except for the elevator, the Old Valley School, and several other buildings. The old Buffalo Valley School would actually become the Brooking Community Club in 1962 after they bought it for $200, and it was used as a community hall. Today you can visit Brooking. It's just a small little community in a farmer's field, but several of the buildings still stand, and it's got an elevator, which is extremely rare for a ghost town to still have.